So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and as I said, we're going to be taking a bit of a break from the siege spree that I've been on, but this is still going to be a very much attack-defense orientated type game, because it is going to be a river crossing, a 3v2 river crossing, and this is another battle actually from the RP series, which is ongoing, and I've got quite a lot of these lately actually, so there must be quite a lot of these battles happening, and quite a lot of them also must be of decently high quality, so that's good. And this time we're going to be seeing some different factions in action. So we're going to be seeing Mordor as the de facto defenders here, having to deal with a rebellion from the savage Northmen of Rhudaur, who are going to be trying to cross this river and dealing some heavy damage here to the orcs and marching into presumably what is their territory on this side of the river. So let's see how successful they're going to be at doing that. We'll go through the attackers once again. That is how we usually do things after all, which means we'll go through the Rhudaur armies first and foremost, starting off here with Engsfitz, who has got some Witch Realm enslavers, which is where his general is. On a river crossing battle like this is a little bit more understandable, because obviously there's a little bit less room for cavalry to move around. If you can get cavalry in behind your enemy's lines, it can be very good, but Rhudaur's cavalry honestly probably isn't as durable as it needs to be able to get by any defences that are there. And obviously while the Rhudaur nobles are strong as knights, obviously good charge, AP and melee as well, you know, they do lack a little bit defensively in comparison to a lot of other knights, as is really a bit of a theme with Rhudaur overall. But the Witch Realm enslavers here are fantastic AP shock infantry on foot, obviously with the general in there. Yeah, very much. The AP is going to be very useful as well against a faction like Mordor. Also a ballista, obviously on a river crossing, one of the key defining factors can be the artillery, and a ballista is obviously going to be very useful for sniping out defensive artillery for Mordor, or just going right through the tight defensive lines that Mordor will undoubtedly lay on for Rhudaur as they move forward. A lot of Dunman Spearmen and Dunman Hunters over here, so the lower tier of Rhudaur's forces as well. I'm obviously just here to make up the numbers, so usually Mordor can count on having proportionally bigger armies than their opponent, but Rhudaur can certainly contest the numbers game with the Orc factions. Rhudaur Marksmen, which overall are not really all that much better than Dunman Hunters, but they do have a lot more ammunition and slightly higher damage, I believe, as well, but nothing that will really bother the enemy too much. But then neither Mordor nor Rhudaur are really based around archery. They do have some options there, but it's certainly not their main focus. 2 Rhudaur pikemen, and you can tell this is an RP battle because this would put you into the red limit in a regular game. And the Rhudaur pikemen are a very strong unit as well, very much the equivalent to something like the Enuminous Gate Guards. Their armour might not suggest that, but that is definitely what they are. The shields are obviously very useful as well to mitigate a pike's natural weakness to arrows. But yeah, if they can get set up, they will be very useful against Mordor, because of course Mordor pikes are one area which they do struggle a little bit with. They're a little bit more focused around their halberdiers. Some Rhudaur swordsmen, very basic, but they will be the workhorse here of a Rhudaur army alongside the Rhudaur clansmen. Less damage, but of course big shields and potentially shield wall. And then the Ettenmoor's Troll Hunters, obviously heavily armoured for Rhudaur forces. You know, most of Rhudaur's army is not all that heavily armoured. Good shields as well, but obviously the javelins are the main event there. There's not going to be any cavalry they have to deal with, I don't think, so they're just going to have to use their javelins purely on enemy infantry, I would think. The second army over here, which is looking quite similar here from Rules 1, he's got some Dunman Spears, he's got some Rhudaur Swordsmen and a Ballista as well. I don't believe he's got any... Oh no, he does. He's got some Rhudaur Berserkers, which are multiple HP axe throwers, although they only have, I think, a couple of volleys before they then charge into melee. Very strong. They're not as strong as the Witch Realm enslavers in melee, to be fair, but their range does give them a bit of utility. And they also are shielded, so there is that going for them as well. And obviously it does add to Rhudaur's already very substantial hand-thrown projectile core of units. There is presumably a hidden unit here as well, which could be the Rangers. I mean, I'd be surprised if Rhudaur didn't have a single unit of Rangers across these 3 armies, just because of how useful they can be. And in a river crossing, if you have a unit of Rangers in the late game, that can really tilt the fight in your favour. But we'll see. Very similar army overall, though, to Engsfitz's. And then over here on the Middle Island, immediately going to be getting involved with engaging with Mordor is going to be FFA Muffins here at the back. He has got some armour upgraded Rhudaur clansmen, so they'll be a little bit tougher. A lot of Rhudaur swordsmen as well, so as you'd expect, a good workhorse on the front line, as I said, for Rhudaur, and this should be a good thing here as he's going to be the first one in, so he's probably going to take the vast bulk of ranged fire from Mordor across the river. Rhudaur pikemen, some Witch Realm enslavers. He also has a catapult right away, so he could be able to bombard the enemy, but I do know the Mordor have got more than one catapult, so could end up being sniped out pretty quickly. Attenmoor's Troll Hunters, Rhudaur Marksmen, so yeah, they're probably going to try and skirmish a little bit here at the start, as well as some Attenmoor's Troll Hunters, and there could well be some hidden units all across the field for Rhudaur, because of course they don't have, well, they do have quite a few units, like the Trollshire Axe Throwers, Ferodrum Javelins, the Rangers of course, many hidden options that they have. Now for the de facto defenders, we have Mordor, Death Eater, who is the player who sent me the replay. Some Orc Fodder here at the front, 2 catapults, a Troll catapult and a regular catapult already going to open up onto Rhudaur's position here in the middle, and of course they can use one of them purely to try and snipe out the catapult and the other one to maybe do some damage to the infantry, so very much a heavy artillery presence here, but that will take up slots that could have been used for infantry, so they're going to have to rely on their range quite a lot here, which is uncharacteristic of Mordor perhaps. Some Morannon archers, which will trade relatively evenly I think with most of the lower end archers of Rhudaur. They do however have some Dunaim shadow bows, which for rangers these guys are pretty heavily armoured to be honest with you. Obviously 4 rangers is the caveat there, but the body piercing is obviously going to be extremely useful if they can get a good angle on Rhudaur when they inevitably cross in numbers. Temple Guard, armour piercing archers as well. You know, against the general's bodyguards this will probably be most useful, like the Witch Realm Enslavers, because Rhudaur don't really have any really good targets to go after in bulk that are heavily armoured, so use of that will be interesting. Orc Javelins of course, another unit of Orc Javelins, a lot of ranged units here for Death Eater. I do worry that maybe he's a little bit light in terms of his infantry, but we'll see. He's got some Morannon infantry and halberds to make up a front line, some Minas Morgul Chosen also with some Morannon halberds, some Sauron's Will, and then back here some Olag High. So yeah, definitely from a range perspective he's going to be able to lay down a lot of punishment onto Rhudaur, but I do hope that Mordor have enough infantry to hold against a big push from the Rhudaur forces. Agalar is his ally today. He also has some Orc Javelins, always a good move because of how cheap they are. Morannon Guard here as well, so some spears, some Orc Fodder of course. I would assume that they are very much a cheap unit in the RP as well. Some Orc Archers, so not as strong as the Morannon Archers, but of course, like I said, Rhudaur, not really well known for their skirmish force anyway. A Ballista, a Troll Catapult over here as well, some more Dunaim Shadow Bows, more Morannon Archers, so yeah, really skirmish heavy Mordor armies here. Some Halberds back here, and then some Orc Maulers as well, so some cheap AP. There could be some hidden units for Agalar, I suppose, as well. But for me, seeing these armies, Rhudaur's best bet, even with all of these artillery pieces here, go for the skirmish phase first of all, just sort of use your archers to wear the enemy down, and then just charge with all the infantry all at once, because I don't think Mordor will be able to stop that with the amount of infantry they've got, but we'll see what happens as we begin. Because it is a 32,000 frame battle, so it's certainly not something that's going to be over with quickly. But certainly from a Rhudaur's perspective, you don't want to just charge in unthinkingly straight away, because Mordor, with the amount of archers and artillery they do have, especially against a low armour faction, as Rhudaur are, they will take a lot of damage, too much damage really. Hit there into the Rhudaur swordsman. Many of them getting back up though, because of course this isn't the fiery projectiles, that one is however. So this is going to be a skirmish phase mostly between artillery I think at this point. Muffins, interestingly enough, is actually pulling back. Look at this. I think they are going for the catapult. It's just a case of that fiery one nearly hit it as well. But like I said, Rhudaur do have a fair amount of archers of their own, and they should be able to. They may not win the skirmish fight, but they don't necessarily need to, because they have a big numbers advantage here over Mordor. All they need to do is wear them down, make sure they have less ammunition, and then later on just pile in with the infantry. Sort of a very classic attacking strategy, really. So Muffins is actually pulling back a lot of his units here, and I would assume, from the catapult's perspective, that's kind of a good idea, because obviously it's just going to get sniped by the Mordor catapults if it stays there. He's also pulling back a lot of his infantry as well to come later. But he is going to keep his javelins, his archers, and his Rhudaur swordsmen here, as well as his general's unit, so definitely going to be mixing and matching the armies here, Rhudaur, which is the way to go. You don't want to just send in one army at a time, because you're going to be wasting elites if you do that. But I am very interested to see how Mordor's infantry corps holds up here. Because, I mean, they don't have a lot of it, and a lot of it is made up of just basic Morannon units as well, which are not really that good in terms of quality. Like, they'll do a job, for sure, but Rhudaur won't be overly concerned about that. Not an awful lot of their higher end units. We saw some Sauron's Will, of course. We have got some trolls as well, but very little else. It is going to be interesting to see how that works, especially seeing as Rhudaur overall, as a faction, they've got a pretty decent amount of attack across most things. Even stuff like their spears tends to do just a little bit more damage than your average run-of-the-mill spear, so it'll be really interesting to see how Mordor's lower-end units cope with this sort of pressure when Rhudaur inevitably move in for the kill. Catapult actually getting into a position to potentially fire again, so playing cat and mouse with a catapult is a bold move just because of the Medieval 2 pathfinding. For siege tends to be, shall we say, less than ideal. They are going to try and snipe out the catapult here. I think Death Eater, he is still going for the flaming shot, which is to his artillery's detriment here, because the troll catapult immediately losing one of its pieces. And this is another thing for Mordor. Like, Mordor need to make good use of these artillery pieces. Like, they've got 4 between 2 armies. If they don't, if they allow Rhudaur to have the better of this engagement, Rhudaur are in for a good time going forward. Because like I said, Mordor will not be able to rely on just pure might in melee here. They're going to need to rely on their skirmishers here. Again, very uncharacteristic for the dark forces of Sauron. Perhaps this is why Rhudaur fancied their chances of the rebellion. Seeing a softer part of the defences here, the ballista carving in. I mean, to be fair, even if they miss the catapults here, there's so many men that they'll be able to hit. It probably is worth it. Right into the heart of some Dunman hunters and some Edmund's troll hunters, actually. I thought they were Rhudaur swordsmen, but they really do need to turn their attention here on this catapult, because Rhudaur, they will eventually be able to snipe these catapults out of flaming shot. They are getting some peripheral hits on the Mordor infantry as well. Getting some hits there. Orc archers also now in range, going to be able to start opening up on the Rhudaur position. Of course, Orc archers versus Dunman hunters is very much a wet noodle contest. Low tier archers with not an awful lot of damage or accuracy. But from a Rhudaur perspective, this is probably what they want. You know, if they can bleed away some of Mordor's ranged resources, they'll be all too happy about that to then try and use their numbers in melee later on. Mordor don't really have anything that can match up to the Witch Realm Enslavers in melee 1-to-1 either, which is always a good sign if you're the attackers, if you can see little matchups like that you can have the better end of. Temple Guard are okay, but they're not the Temple Executioners. Olag High as well, like, again, the best way to beat trolls is to send a unit like the Witch Realm Enslavers after them, because they'll do a lot of damage and they'll start peeling away those unit models quickly. Even the Olag High, who are really like the kings of the troll world, really. They, the trolls of the White Hand, and the 2 armoured trolls from Angmar. Are they going after the catapult now? I believe they are. It's a long way though, and these, honestly, even without the flaming shot on, these catapults aren't really scoring critical hits on one another. Rhudaur marksmen back here, so still a lot of the Rhudaur forces waiting way on the other side of the river. And again, this is not too surprising, to be honest with you. They're sending forward a ballista as well. Like Rhudaur, they are engaging in that game plan, I think, of trying to wear Mordor's resources down more than anything else, and then coming forward with a superior force in melee to finish them off. You can see here that Aguilar is using both of his archers to bombard those Dunman hunters. Again, Mordor don't have really much of a choice but to do this, but this is exactly what Rhudaur wants. So Rhudaur, at the moment, are going to be dictating the terms of the engagement, because the ballista is also having to fire, because if it doesn't, it will eventually find itself being destroyed. But it missed again, so yeah, the artillery not really having a good time against one another here. The other ballista also getting into position now, so Mordor probably feeling the pressure at this point. Dunman hunters getting into the water as well to start shooting at some targets across the way. Death Eater's archers will be able to respond in kind, however. And initially I would expect Mordor's archers to be able to have the better end of this, but it is still what Rhudaur won. There is, of course, still the small matter of the Adunheim shadow bows on both sides. Troll catapult swinging way out wide as well. Yes, the Adunheim shadow bows are still a big factor in this. What we got here? There's a lot of catapult wrecks around here. Yeah, like, again, Death Eater's only got 2 catapults total left now. 1 make that. So yeah, this is very bad news for Mordor, this, because with such a heavy investment in their artillery, it hasn't really done anything to Rhudaur at this point. Very superficial kills at best. So Rhudaur very much in the ascendancy here. It's not over yet, though. Again, it's not as if Rhudaur have a ton of quality in melee either. Most of it's swordsmen, clansmen, and dunmen. Couple of elite units, but the ballista on fire. The projectile not hitting it, but the fire trail did, and that means that that artillery piece will crumble as well. So still Mordor not having the best time of it. It is interesting as well. It is worth saying as well, because this is an RP, these armies were sort of made in advance, so good forward planning, I think, this from Rhudaur to go, because, you know, these are good compositions to go up against artillery-heavy builds, I think, with these 2 ballistae, and then the catapult in the background to come forward when all of the defensive artillery is dealt with, so it was good forward planning from whoever did that from Rhudaur, I think, because I think from a composition perspective, Rhudaur have got a fairly ideal force to deal with this Mordor defence. There are a few caveats to that, like obviously, the Rangers and the Javelins. But more and more, it looks like later on in the battle it's going to come down to melee might, and like I said, that's what Rhudaur will really want. And now, no artillery left for Death Eater. A true tragedy. Sauron's Will and Minas Morgul chosen, like, you know, armour-piercing shock troops, heavily armoured spears, not really what you need against Rhudaur. And here you can see again, like, Mordor having the worst end of this particular part of the artillery engagement as well. Not a single ballista from Rhudaur being killed off, and when I say that, there is a ballista over here that has been dealt with. Maybe this was the one they were trying to shoot. But Engsford still has a ballista. So that's 3 of the 4 artillery units for Mordor already dealt with without landing any significant blows on Rhudaur. Which of course means later on they'll have their own catapult which they can use as they will. Still these Dunman Hunters trying to do their thing. At this point I think Mordor realise they're going to have to be real efficient. Oh, and hello. Mordor coming forward their Troll Catapult crew. Now that they don't have any catapults to tend, they're going to have to be used in the manner that regular trolls are, and they're going to force the Dunman Hunters back. Of course, they're nowhere near the powerhouses that the Olag High are, but I mean, it does mean that they're not fully useless in melee, so that's another thing the Troll Catapult has going for it, of course. Not only are they faster and actually move swiftly, unlike pretty much every other piece of siege equipment, also when all their ammunition is expended, they do have a use beyond just standing in the way of people's swords and accepting the blows for other units. Ooh, and now they're going after the Temple Guards, and now with all of the artillery pretty much gone, they're free to try and go after some high-profile units, and Mordor really being forced back here. The danger, of course, is that Mordor retreat too many of their elite units far back to avoid the artillery, and leave their front line woefully exposed, because then Rhudaur could rush across the river in force, and if Mordor lose the choke points, it's all over. They need to hold this river, otherwise they are doomed. But Rhudaur have played a very good game so far. Definitely going about their business in the way that you would want these Dunman Hunters as well. I mean, they're not having any sort of counter-fire put into them. They're going after the fodder, but I mean, at this point, they're doing their job and they're getting 3 kills. Ballista crew over there as well. The Orc Archers starting to fire once again, but what are they firing at? Perhaps the infantry as it moves forward, the Rhudaur swordsmen perhaps moving in the vanguard, so Rhudaur are going to start probing the Mordor lines, perhaps sensing that they've done enough damage, they've waited long enough. These won't be enough to smash Mordor's line apart by any means. Some Dunman Spearmen on the other side as well, but perhaps they're just looking, you know, seeing if they can coax some hidden units out. Use up yet more of this ammunition on a force which they don't really expect to be successful. I'll be interested to see how Mordor can try and take the initiative back in this battle, because the loss of the artillery is big. Like, they still have that Troll Catapult way out there, but they're going after the densely packed Morannon units way at the back. Some fortunate shots could be a bad thing for Mordor there as well. Like, luck has not been on their side either. When it comes to an artillery duel, luck does play a big part in it. I do think that Rhudaur, they made their own luck there, but Mordor can still feel a little bit unfortunate that their artillery wasn't really able to even snipe out too many of the enemy pieces. There's sounds of battle, and yet they're not even in melee yet. So the Orc fodder will meet the advance here of the Rhudaur swordsman. This man is the first one into glorious melee combat. He will almost certainly die pretty quickly as well, even if it is just to Orc fodder. Morannon Guard moving in as well, so not really fantastic units being moved in here, just spears. So the Rhudaur swordsmen won't feel too bad about their situation. But, you know, with the archers support, particularly in the background there, it's not going to be an attack which bears any fruit for Rhudaur yet, but then again, it doesn't need to be, like I said. Arrows still flying overhead. Troll Catapult trying to make some shots now, as those Rhudaur forces are now crossing the river. And again, the Rhudaur could feel like they're due a little bit of luck. And immediately seeing that, FFA Muffins is going to turn his entire force around. His Catapult, meanwhile, is in a very nice position as well. The Troll Catapult crew coming forward with the support of another unit of fodder, and with the Trolls in here, these very basic Dunman Spears are really not going to be able to make any headway at all. Sort of the token chainmail they wear is not really going to be substantial enough to protect them from those large lumps of wood that the Trolls wield. A lot of arrow fire coming in here, though. Any more units coming across? I mean, the Witch Realm Enslavers are coming across, so perhaps FFA Muffin sees a bit of an opportunity to inflict some damage. And again, the Temple Guard were far enough away that they are not going to be able to get some volleys as they cross the river, so perhaps it was well thought out. The Adunheim Shadow Bows have revealed themselves, but again, that could be construed as bait as well, because they are going to be in range of the Rhudaur skirmishers. Perhaps more worryingly, the artillery is also going to see them now. So perhaps seeing that elite unit, using an elite unit as bait is an interesting strategy, but it can work. And the Adunheim Shadow Bows immediately going to find themselves the target of a lot of units. So again, that's good battlefield awareness from Rhudaur, I would say. I don't know whether it was intentional to use that unit as bait, or whether they were just trying to kill the Trolls off quickly. But regardless, they have now brought the Orc Javelins forward. They know now that there are Shadow Bows over there. The Temple Guard have also been brought forward, so all of these units are now in the sight of the Rhudaur Archers, which the Rhudaur Archers are nothing special, but they will still be able to do some significant damage. And like I said, Mordor are entirely dependent here on their skirmishers and their ranged units. Their artillery is already mostly gone. If they can take away the really dangerous archers as well, I really don't see a way back into this for Mordor. Rhudaur Sword's been doing a very good job on the front line of just taking the attention of Mordor for now. They will, of course, waver and break eventually. Something which could work in Mordor's favour is the fact these units have been sent forward as, they have managed to bait out these units, but the Javelins and the Rangers will still be able to loose their projectiles into them, which means the Witch Realm Enslavers may not be too long for this world. You can tell that the skirmishes are having an effect purely because every time a blow lands, it says evenly matched against fodder. The fodder shouldn't last too long against Witch Realm Enslavers, though, to be honest with you. Those wicked-looking tridents going to be enough to kill off these fodder in droves. Not the most heavily armoured units, of course, fodder, but that doesn't really matter when you're talking about a unit of the quality of the Enslavers. Moran on Archers, Orc Javelins, so Mordor trying to use their ranged units to good effect. The Witch Realm Enslavers are not really dropping quickly enough. Orc Javelins a little bit inaccurate, perhaps. Every volley, one or two more of them fall. But Rhudaur have done exactly the right thing by not blobbing up early. And I would imagine the more damage that Mordor take over on this side of the river, the closer that an all-out assault will become. And I do believe eventually, with the way that the wind is blowing in this battle, that Rhudaur will soften Mordor up to a certain extent, and then they will come forward with everything they have, and Mordor will not have the strength to stop them any longer. That's how I feel things will go. And also, the danger here is Mordor have got a lot of their reinforcements quite far back. If they do start to lose these choke points, they're going to have to scramble to try and get in there again. Rhudaur still just filtering men in. Orc Javelins coming in. I mean, to be fair, Mordor haven't taken significant losses from an army percentage perspective still. That will not feel great for them. Right into the hearts of Moran on Infantry. And Moran on Infantry are an important asset for Mordor to have at this point. They need manpower on the front line. There you can see the Witch Realm Enslavers. They did take some significant losses there on the front line, to be fair, and the Orc Fodder are now pushing the Dunman Spearmen back. Two of some of the lowest tier spears in the game. But the Orc Fodder with the numbers will be able to turn the Rhudaur forces back, and the General was in there as well. Can't believe I didn't see him. He was back here. getting shanked by fodder. So Muffin's losing his general, and to be fair, Rhudaur do have slightly better morale than some of the other evil man factions like Khand or Harad, but morale is still not their strongest point. And perhaps at this point, maybe trying to break them is one of Mordor's better options. There's a lot of archers still over here though, really teeing off onto Rhudaur as they move across the river. Not a lot of fodder left though. And again, this is maybe a little bit of a problem. A lot of Mordor's force here is made up of spears. The Rhudaur swordsmen should trade relatively efficiently with them. Not so much with these trolls. I mean, it may just be a catapult crew, but with all the support the trolls are getting from the archers and the spears on foot, the Rhudaur swordsmen should be turned back. And that'll be another unit they can chalk up. But they need this to happen a lot more as the battle goes along. More swordsmen coming across. So again, they're just feeding these units in, Rhudaur. Slowly but surely trying to make an impact on Mordor through attrition, and also, most importantly I think, trying to chew through their ammunition supply. As soon as they feel as though Mordor has a sufficiently low amount of ammunition, that's when I believe Rhudaur will commit the main bulk of their force to try and smash across this river and into Mordor's lands. Morannon infantry now on the front line, who will be able to match up relatively evenly with the Rhudaur swordsmen, certainly more so than the fodder and the Morannon spears. There's actually some Morannon bows in there as well, Morannon archers, but obviously they are not great in melee, but still just from a numbers perspective here, Mordor having the better of this. There are some Randodine rangers as well, so that was Rules' hidden unit. So that's something else Rhudaur can chalk up in their favour. If they can keep those guys for the late game, even if Mordor do manage to mount a relatively successful defence when Rhudaur come forward in force, that could be exactly the sort of thing to turn the screw even more. What's going on here? The Adunheim shadow bows are firing away into this blob of Rhudaur swords, I think. So they're certainly not long for this world. Regular archers and rangers shooting into them should turn them back across the river very, very quickly indeed. Having said that, what are they firing at? No, yeah, they are. I was wondering if they're firing onto the island, which, considering how spread out Rhudaur are, don't think that would have been a particularly great idea. Orc javelins still over there. Rhudaur should run out of ammunition in their initial archers before Mordor do. So perhaps that is something else Mordor can hope for, as yet more Rhudaur swordsmen trudge through the shallows to engage the Mordor front line. Catapult also maybe going to begin to fire again. I mean, this is a fairly decent blob, especially now with some Morannon halberds coming forward. I mean, without the presence of any of the Franodine pikes on the front line, the Morannon halberds with their phalanx will be a very useful anchor for Mordor to hold this line. Of course, they will be very vulnerable to any arrow fire that is still forthcoming. Rhudaur swordsmen actually kind of breaking through the fodder and the orc archers there. Fortunately, there are reinforcements on hand, a full unit of Morannon guard to block progress. Those Attenmore's troll hunters are moving forward to try and do some damage as well, but immediately they find themselves the target of all of the archers as well as the defensive javelins. So this unit of Attenmore's troll hunters may be flying a bit too close to the sun, and they will need to get out of there. But fortunately, their armour is saving them to a certain extent from those archers. Most other Rhudaur units would have been getting torn to shreds by now, but those metal plates definitely proving worthwhile. Over here, Mordor still says defeat seems certain for them, and I can only imagine that's because of the Rhudaur range support that they are getting. A lot of arrows coming in to try and turn back another unit of Dunman hunters moving closer to the front line. The Troll Catapult now obviously starting to fall apart. They've been going in and out of these initial engagements for a little while now, so that's not too surprising. But they have managed to break the Rhudaur swordsmen, so they may not have been the tour de force that I'm sure Mordor were hoping for from an artillery perspective, but they have at least contributed to the Mordor defence here. And again, you've got to make the best of a situation, so far Mordor are doing their best. Morannon archers, I think, out of ammunition now, so actually no, they've still got their bows out. Some of them have anyway. These Dunman hunters moving forward, and again, this is exactly the sort of thing these low tier archers are sort of really designed for. getting in there, absorbing the ammunition, really proving to be a target which is kind of too crap to go after, or too crap to want to go after with your ammunition. But Mordor don't really have too much of a choice here. And you can see here that the Rangers are trying to get into a really nice position to shoot Rhudaur as they cross the river. But the problem with this is Rhudaur know they're here now, so the ballista is shooting across the river. There's also the Temple Guard back here, but of course they really need to pick and choose their targets. They're really good for taking on individual units, not whole armies really like the Rangers are. The Rhudaur swordsmen are actually managing to somewhat surround them around on halberds here, which is not a good sign. Rhudaur clansmen moving forward as well with their big shields, like, you know, spears, spear malice, but again, it's just more men on the front line here. And I really don't see the winds of this battle changing anytime soon. Like, Rhudaur have really done a stand-up job so far, a sort of textbook assault on the kind of army they were facing on the other side of the river so far. These Rhudaur clansmen trying to filter through, and again, this is kind of the risk here. Loads of Mordor's reinforcements are way at the back, which means if Rhudaur do start to break through in a big way, Mordor are going to be scrambling here, so they really need to be careful. Like, Rhudaur probably won't commit forward huge numbers just yet, but they do need to be sort of ready for the possibility that they do get sort of turned back just by these forces. The other Troll Catapult crew now moving in. The Sauron's Will in melee. They will certainly prove to be a juicy target for the Rhudaur archers. They're unshielded after all, but I mean, in melee they should be more than sufficient to deal with the Rhudaur clansmen, and already some significant losses being taken by the Rhudaur infantry now. But the Sauron's Will are among some of the most elite units in an infantry sense that Mordor have on the field, so I mean, if they're being used this early, Rhudaur will certainly not be too upset about that. Those are Dunaim shadow bows. I mean, they are hiding, so I'm kind of surprised that the ballista is actually able to target them, although they're shifting around now. A pretty big Rhudaur. This is actually a pretty big Rhudaur force coming forward now. A lot of Rhudaur swordsmen following those spears in who were in the vanguard. The Witch Realm enslavers from Muffins are also coming back, slightly depleted, but still, I mean, this is perhaps a bit of an opportunity for Rhudaur to try and capitalise on some of Mordor's stretched formations. Some Morannon infantry coming forward, but again, this is also an opportunity for Mordor to finally try and use these rangers to good effect, because I mean, this is a big blob. The Orc Javelins are also targeting the Witch Realm enslavers as they move forward. Morannon halberds moving in, but there's a gap here. I mean, if Rhudaur take it, they could force path their way through that gap, although I think they're just sort of focusing on getting all these units on the front line and trying to just go through sheer weight of numbers. But those rangers, I mean, the Rhudaur forces on the front line not feeling too good about this from a morale perspective, even less so I assume now the halberds are getting in there. Those javelins and rangers definitely having an effect, so this is an opportunity for Mordor to make up some ground, I think, on Rhudaur. Can they do it? I mean, they're really going to carve through here, and again, this is where Rhudaur are vulnerable. Like, their main line, oh, that's not good either. That's a huge amount of friendly fire from Muffins, a disaster. That's surely going to break this force. And it is, yeah. He saw the opportunity to try and get into that Mordor blob that had formed, but he only really hit his own men. And that's an important moment here in this fight for Mordor. They've been due a break, and they finally got one. But yeah, that is where Rhudaur are vulnerable, like I said. Like most other forces like this, particularly from the Western Kingdoms, like a lot of their main line is well armoured. Like Gondor, a good example of that. Rhudaur are not, though. Armour is not their strong suit. So rangers in that situation will absolutely carve through their blobs. You can see here that, you know, Rhudaur are getting into position with some Essenmoor's Troll Hunters trying to do some damage here to these Morannon guardsmen holding down this river crossing. Morannon Guard are probably among the units that they would mind losing the least in this situation, but I mean, just sitting here and taking it is not really something Mordor will want to do, because every man is going to be important based on how the early game went, but it's an important moment in this fight. That Rhudaur assault was by no means like their sort of decisive alpha strike, but it went very, very poorly. That friendly fire, very decisive. And again, I don't really feel as though the catapult needed to be used there. Like it could, if it works, like it's brilliant, but if it goes wrong, it really does go wrong. Like your men were already wavering, it's always going to be a risk, because like a minor grazing shot may have been enough to break them, but that was right into the middle. Many of those units will come back, of course, but they're going to be depleted. They're going to be easier to break the second time around. We'll see if Mordor can have more of that good fortune. The Dunheim Shadowbows, to be fair, they have been targeted to an extent by the artillery, but it hasn't been decisive either. It was more important for Mordor's artillery to do well for them, I think, based on the compositions. But I mean, it's not as if, you know, Rhudaur's artillery has already been worthwhile just by stopping them. But from a kills perspective, it's not been as good as it could have been. You know, admittedly, I'm just trying to sort of poke holes in Rhudaur here, because for the most part, this battle has gone how they would have wanted. Really, that large-scale break was the first moment where they will feel slightly under the cosh. You can see here that these Attenmore's Trollhunters, I think, now out of ammunition, moving forward with the Dunman Hunters, but the Dunman Hunters immediately shaken, because of course they're absolutely dreadful in melee. The Attenmore's Trollhunters are better though, but they too are shaken. There is only 44 of them left. Some Dunman Spearmen, a lot of Dunman Spearmen are moving forward, so I think Mordor will need to shore up this line with something a little bit more substantial, because numbers... Well, here come the Trolls once again. The Troll Catapults, I mean, to be fair, the Troll Catapults, they may not have been very good at all as artillery, but they have been very useful as sort of how regular Trolls are meant to be used. Amusingly enough, usually that is most certainly not the case, but you see something new every day, I suppose. Meanwhile, they're back for a second bite of the cherry over here, Rhudaur, as another unit of Rhudaur swordsmen comes in. Sauron's Will still on the front line, but they're still taking a ton of damage from the Rhudaur archers, continuing to shower them with arrows. Morannon halberds will be suffering the same fate, I'm sure. So both sides really taking a lot of damage from the ranged components of the other, but Rhudaur will be the ones to break yet again. There are the Trolls. Rhudaur Marksmen, are they out of ammunition? No, I didn't think so. I mean, Rhudaur Marksmen hardly ever run out of ammunition throughout the course of a fight. They've got so much ammo. With their 3 quivers. Yeah, Rhudaur Swordsmen fighting to the death. So once again, this side of things, Rhudaur breaking. But Rhudaur doing a lot of damage to Mordor in return as well with their archers from the central island. Over here, meanwhile, the Trolls coming back. Mordor trying to preserve as much of their manpower in the background as they can, not wanting to commit forward too much, because of course Rhudaur will then use their archers to good effect yet again. So the Troll Catapult coming in here, and that should be enough to break this Rhudaur force as well. So Mordor really doing their best here, and it's been a good fight so far. Like, initially I was worried that Rhudaur would just be able to build on the momentum exponentially as the fight wore on, but that has not been the case. Mordor have managed to really dig in and give Rhudaur a fight, which I'm glad to see. More javelins coming in as yet another unit of swordsmen makes its way to this side of the river. No decisive ground made yet by Rhudaur, but then again they haven't really committed forward a large-scale force. They do need to be a little bit careful, I think, Rhudaur, because if you have a look back here, I mean, they do still have a lot of manpower back here for sure, but if they continue to filter in units like this, they won't have enough of a sort of large blob to really do that alpha strike that I was figuring they were aiming for. Maybe they are just going to go all-out attrition here as yet more swordsmen begin crossing the water. As Mordor have forced Rhudaur right back into the river. Sauron's Will getting in here to these Rhudaur marksmen, who did still have ammunition. They may have been a depleted unit, but I mean, Mordor will be glad just to get rid of some more of Rhudaur's archers, I think. Been a real thorn in their side. Yeah, I would still say that Rhudaur are definitely the favourites to go on to win this battle. But I mean, you never know. I mean, Mordor they've been under continuous pressure, but they haven't buckled yet. They do need to defend this front line over here, though. The Dunheim Shadowbows are shooting in here. More javelins coming in, but they do need infantry on hand, because otherwise these Rhudaur swordsmen could make a hole. But to be fair, I mean, most of Rhudaur's forces are actually going down this side of the river, so maybe Mordor can get away with just a more token force over here. Single unit of halberds, and some archers also giving them the business. Trollshort axe throwers are now moving forward, though, as well, so another unit that was hidden at the start from rules. And I'm a big fan of axe throwers in this patch, and particularly against Morannon halberds, they are going to be absolutely ideal for trying to break down this Mordor front line. Meanwhile, surely, yeah, the Dunheim Shadowbows are shooting once again, but a little bit of a problem here, because Mordor, this, I think, is what I was always a little bit concerned about. Rhudaur are now coming forward in force, and there isn't really any reinforcements on hand. They're too far back. They're going to move forward now, but that is going to be too late, I think, to stop this Rhudaur force, and this could be the moment where Rhudaur make their advantage insurmountable. Granadine pikemen are also moving forward. They're keeping up the pressure on this side of things. I mean, to be fair, the Trollshire axe throwers have been absolutely ripped apart, I think, by the Rangers. Obviously very, very vulnerable to arrow fire, the Trollshire axe throwers, but it isn't really over here that Mordor need to be concerned. They're holding over here relatively comfortably. It's over here where Rhudaur swordsmen are starting to swamp forward. A lot of, morale issues potentially again for Rhudaur. Moran on halberds are moving forward. Javelins still firing away into the Granadine pikemen, but this is an opportunity, this, for Rhudaur. In come the Olag High. Do they have enough reinforcements to really make this stick? I mean, this I think is the moment for the Alpha Strike. Because, I mean, I don't think you're really going to be able to bleed away the Rangers' ammunition to the extent that you want. So eventually Rhudaur do need to take the decision to just commit a huge force. I mean, this is the start of a huge force, and there are more reinforcements following, so maybe this will be the moment. That's a lot of javelins coming in here. Like, the key here is Mordor went for very skirmish-heavy armies in the RP, so Rhudaur need to take advantage of this by sort of swamping over their defensive positions quickly and getting into those skirmishes, because, I mean, all javelins are not really worth anything in melee, nor are Moran on archers. The shadow bows and the temple guard obviously slightly more so, but Mordor have been able, despite their defenders lagging quite far behind, they have been able to scramble a defence together. Olag High, Moran on halberds, and Minas Morgul chosen now on the front line. I think the Olag High are going to try and retreat now that the infantry are here. But yeah, that's actually disastrous for Rhudaur. Starting to break and fight to the death on the front line, which is not what they wanted at all, because that was a significant portion of their army. And at this point, the question has to be asked, will Rhudaur have enough men to break down this Mordor assault? Have they spent too much time filtering individual units in, trying to wear down the arrows? Have they not paid Mordor the respect they were due? It's an interesting question, because, I mean, have a look back here. There are some Ferodrum javelins there from Engsfit's Granadine pikes. I mean, it's definitely not the horde that Rhudaur had at the start. As we do sort of make our way towards the final 10,000 frames. There are the Adunheim shadow bows, of course. There are these Granadine rangers still that Rhudaur could be able to use. Mordor have again forced Rhudaur back into the water over on this side of the crossing. But it is over here where Rhudaur committed forward more of their resources. Clansmen trying to retreat. Asimul's Troll Hunters trying to throw some javelins there into the Moran on halberds, doing some damage. There's still yet more of these arrows just flying in. Adunheim shadow bows. Of course, Rhudaur have also managed to do a lot of damage with their own archers, which may be the key later on. And actually, you can see there, I think, yeah, Engsfit's using his Granadine rangers to try and use those body-piercing projectiles to carve through the Mordor line. And that is the saving grace there for Rhudaur, despite that assault being a bit of a failure in the end. Rhudaur are going to be able to use their archers yet again to good effect. And again, it's weird, like Mordor and Rhudaur are not really what you think of when you think of powerhouses when it comes to archery, but so far in this battle, they have been the important units for both sides. Now, once again, Muffins... This went badly last time, but now there aren't really any Rhudaur forces on the front line. And this is a big move, this from Death Eater, because he's moving forward his Olag High. He's going to be able to get into the Atenmor's Troll Hunters. And the Atenmor's Troll Hunters will really not enjoy being in melee with Olag High, and that could be another good catch here if they aren't reinforced. So those catapults again. And that is why Mordor did have so many of their units back there, because, Rhudaur secured the artillery advantage early, which is something I'm sure they very much were not enjoying, but even so, like, to be fair, the Rhudaur artillery has that important moment earlier on was something which went in Mordor's favour. So you can see here the Animal Troll Hunters, they're just sort of stood here taking the hits from the Olag High, which eventually you would have to imagine will not go too well for the heavily armoured spearmen from Arnor. And still, like, this is the problem that... Look at all these quivers sticking out the water. This is the problem that Mordor do have. Like, this, pretty much the perfect battle for the Rhudaur marksmen, because they're able to just continuously fire throughout, you know, pretty much the entirety of the battle, and there's nothing Mordor can really do about it. More Dunman Spearmen, the Franadine Rangers moving forward now. So now, this could be the important moment for them to really shine. For Rhudaur, forward come the Franadine Berserkers. Still a very competitive fight indeed, but you would still give the advantage to Rhudaur. Because like, you would think that Mordor will just run out of the ability to hold these choke points, and as soon as that happens, Rhudaur should be able to wash over Mordor. In come the Morannon Archers to block the advance of the Dunman Hunters, and with the Morannon Archers here, this should be enough to rout yet another unit from Rhudaur. And there they go. A lot of Rhudaur's forces have actually sort of broken and then fought to the death, which is fun. Temple Guard over there from Agalar, so they've still got those armor-piercing archers they could use, but again, they're more useful for taking out single targets more so than big blobs, which hordes I think are what they really need to be trying to take out, which of course the Rangers will have to deal with, but depleted, and they've already used a pretty decent amount of their ammunition at this point. What are they going after? Sort of firing way up into the air and going after the Admiral's Troll Hunters. It's not good positioning from Death Eater, I've got to be honest. He needs to move his forces forwards a little bit. Line of sight is very important for an archer like that, because you need to be maximising their damage output if you can help it. Those armour-piercing projectiles are too good to waste, and far too important for Mordor to waste at this point. Minas Morgul Chosen charging forward into the upgraded Rhudaur clansmen. Minas Morgul Chosen certainly the superior of the two units there. Morannon Archers and Halberds also moving forward in support. And you would imagine that Mordor would win that fight, but it is going to be a very long and grindy one. Dunman Spearmen crossing the river. Yet again, though, this is a very token force. I can't imagine they'll have all that much of an impact here. Mordor should be quite comfortable in holding this line yet again, and it's more manpower that Rhudaur will lose in the long run. Franadine Berserkers, I think, taking some hits from the Adunai. The Dunman Hunters are not having a good time. Temple Guard, I mean, this is a good opportunity for the Temple Guard. I mean, there's not really many targets better than the Franadine Berserkers at this point. You may as well go after them, because they are going to be a presence on the front line. So I would start shooting them if I were Agalar, because again, single target entities are what they're good at. Shooting into blobs is kind of a useless gesture with them, because any projectile that doesn't hit the target you want it to could be viewed as a waste. Ettenwall's Troll Hunters trying to make an impression on this Mordor front line. Still arrows and javelins being flung back and forth. Rotting meat now being flung across the river from Muffin, so of course that's the sign that Rhudaur's catapult is out of its more potent ammunition. This is the key moment in the fight though. Like, I feel as though, you know, Mordor, their manpower is starting to diminish. Their ability to hold the front line is going to get less and less as the fight goes on, but Rhudaur's ability to keep up this assault is also getting less and less. Like, they don't have that much left. They should still win. I do still feel as though, certainly from a melee perspective, they have a little bit too much for Mordor at this point, but I mean, still these Orc Javelins are giving them the business, and the Franadine Pikes, which are usually such an effective unit in an atrocious fight, I've just been hammered in this battle. Like, Mordor have done a very good job at sort of focusing down some of these targets, be it a big blob or individual ones. In come the Olag High, and of course the Olag High, exactly what will be called for against a unit of pikes like this. And the Olag High is still a big presence as well, of course. Rhudaur still have the tools to deal with them, but the Olag High could make a huge dent in Rhudaur's manpower. Here come the Franadine Berserkers yet again. I'm really surprised they haven't been shot up. I mean, they have taken losses, but it's from javelins, not the Temple Guard. And the Temple Guard, like, there is a case for saying maybe you want to just dump their ammunition into Mordor quickly and then use them as infantry. So the Temple Guard are probably the strongest unit of infantry Mordor have left. Rhudaur continuing to try and cross the river. Still, they're just filtering in though. And again, I feel as though, like, they have gone for a bit of an alpha strike at one point and made some decent progress and were thrown back. But Mordor could be able to weather this storm here. Could it be that the wave-based assault will not pay off for Rhudaur in the end? Because I don't think it's necessarily the wrong thing they've done here. body piercing going into the Dunman Spearman. Not the most important target, but it's still a blob they can't really ignore at this point. Mordor, they just need to kill Rhudaur's manpower as best they can. Another big force coming down here. Perhaps one slight criticism you could have of Rhudaur is that they've really over-focused on one crossing here. Like over here, Mordor have never really been in danger of losing ground, whereas over here they have been because of the amount of manpower that's been sent. But again, it's kind of difficult because, I mean, for Mordor it's fairly easy to just readjust over here for a river crossing, because it's not as if Rhudaur can take Mordor by surprise all that much. Like, a river crossing is very much a linear battle. You're never really going to be able to get the drop on your opponent when there's only one direction you can attack them from. And that might be why the Temple Guard aren't shooting over here, because they already have used up their ammunition, which is possible over here as well, I suppose. Are they in melee? Well, they're coming over here now. Granadine Rangers, I mean, Mordor probably need to shore up this line with something a little bit more. More Rhudaur shadow bow fire coming in. Like just a single unit of halberds over here, because again, Rhudaur are coming forward here in force. The Sauron's will, so I mean, at this point, it's all or nothing for both of them. The Temple Guards, the Sauron's will coming forwards. The Ettenwall's Troll Hunters. I mean, that is something else Rhudaur can count on here in the late game. They should still have Reforged Javelins, I think, hidden away somewhere back there. Indeed, they do. They still have Ettenwall's Troll Hunters, and that sort of damage is something which Mordor may not be able to bear. And you can see now that their Olag High, I think, are starting to lose unit models. They've been doing a lot of heavy lifting for quite a while, but they should still be able to have a bit of an impact here on these Rhudaur clansmen. Getting smashed up. Yeah, defeat seems certain. I mean, Rhudaur, they need to move forward here. I think this battle is in danger of getting away from them a little bit. I mean, here come the Black Wolves. That's a significant unit to reveal as well. Berserker type unit. When Mordor are sort of don't have too much in the way of ranged resources left, that is the sort of unit which can really make a big impression. But Rhudaur need to make sure that their front line doesn't break here, because if it does, then they don't really have enough to mount another big assault to deal with Mordor. And they're going to need a big assault, because if they keep filtering in like this, units like the Temple Guard are going to be able to stand firm. With the support they're getting from the Javelins, the Temple Guard over here from Agalar do have ammunition left. And I would imagine like the Reforged Javelins are probably the better target to go after, just because they're stronger in melee. There'll be more of a presence in melee anyway. And yet again, Rhudaur being held at arm's length over here, certainly. 23 Adunheim Shadow Bows are still going to be trying to do their damage. Orc Maulers are back here, still fresh as well. 2 units of Orc Maulers that are completely undamaged. They may not be high tier, but that's still just over 400 men that Mordor are going to be able to send forward into the breach in the late game. Orc Maulers, the heroes that Mordor need? Probably not. The AP isn't going to be overly useful. They're just going to need the warm bodies on the front line to keep Rhudaur at bay. But you would imagine that these Javelins, again, I keep saying it, like time and time again throughout this fight, you would imagine that Rhudaur should be able to seal the deal here. The fact that Mordor are still standing does go to show their resilience, I suppose. They didn't have an overly impressive infantry force, like I said, and yet it has been able to do the job while their ranged units have done the damage. Here come the Franadine Pikes with their sort of single file lining in here, which means they're not really going to be in the best of formations. Going in here to the Orc Javelins. The Orc Javelins are terrible in melee, so it's very much a skeleton crew, but here come the Moran Halberds. Yeah, the Mordor announcer is still not fancying their chances. Going on over here. What are the Orc Maulers doing? The Orc Maulers are going after the Franadine Berserkers, who were trying to kill off the Shadow Bows. Didn't even see that. Secret Agent Berserkers, but the Berserkers will be just fine sort of drawing off 200 Orcs from the front line. Very happy with that, I'm sure they will be. Reforged Javelins over here. Again, their damage is going to be important as well. They'll be able to do a lot of damage there to the Moran Halberds. And then when they get into melee, of course, multiple HP with those big clubs. They're not the same as the Witch-Elven Slavers, of course, but they're still going to be very strong here in the late game. Something that Mordor will struggle to deal with, alongside everything else, of course. Because you would say the Temple Guard, among the strongest units left. I mean, this unit of Witch Realm Enslavers is probably the single strongest unit of infantry that is left on the field. There's another unit of Reforged Javelins here as well. So Rhudaur here are going to be relying on their quality. Mordor are going to have to rely on a bit more quantity. Granadine Rangers are over here. I think here that the Adunheim Shadow Bows are just going to have to deal with the Berserkers here. Because Mordor, they're going to need all of these units on the front line, trying to just overwhelm Rhudaur as they come forward, because the Granadine Rangers are going to slip into the backfield. This unit of Sauron's Will back here, so at this point Mordor are going to be going all in. I think Rhudaur are also going to be going all in. There goes a general, which I would imagine was probably one of the Mordor ones. Victory is a distinct possibility for Mordor over here though, but with troll short axe throwers and with javelins, like you would imagine Rhudaur, again, I keep saying that eventually Rhudaur are going to smash Mordor up. There goes another Rhudaur general, and breaking could be a real problem here for Rhudaur if they're not careful. They do have enough sort of strong elite units on the front line that they shouldn't, but you never know. Victory seems certain over here. I mean, the Sauron's Will trying to plug the gap. I mean, finally it looks as though Rhudaur are going to have the effect they wanted over here. Both units of Reforged Javelins doing their thing. The Sauron's Will over here, the Temple Guard very much on their last legs, so Mordor, I think this might be the moment where Mordor's valiant defence finally comes crumbling down. Granadine Rangers in the backfield. In come the Orc Maulers, another unit of 200, but it's not 200 quality men by any means. But over here, Mordor's still holding on. But here comes the Troll Shore Axe Throwers, the Orc Maulers again, pretty much a perfect target for them. Unshielded, lightly armoured. They're going to try and kill off the Granadine Berserkers here, and they should be very successful at that. But with the support of those Troll Shore Axe Throwers, even over here, Rhudaur looking like they're going to be victorious. What a fight this has been so far, though. Like, it looked like Rhudaur were just going to run away with it, but Mordor, they came back into it through a bit of good fortune, but also some good defensive planning. But unfortunately, in the end, I do feel as though the loss of their artillery in the early game was always going to be something that was really, really difficult to come back from based on their compositions. Like, it was so heavily based on being able to bombard the enemy with their artillery, and they just, you know, that was taken away from them. Reforged Javelins now going to move into melee, I think, with those big spiky clubs. And that should be enough. I mean, the Sauron's Will are going to do their best, but they're going to waver and they're going to break. Troll Shore Axe Thrower is always a nice unit to have in the late game as well. Javelins and Axe Throwers, the bread and butter of Rhudaur. And in the end, that is going to be what sees them across the line. Otherwise, they may not have been able to do enough damage to the remaining Mordor defenders to see this through, but a very Pyrrhic victory for Rhudaur, but they are going to be able to get across this river and march deeper into Mordor's territory. We shall see what plunder that brings them. Probably nothing great, to be honest with you. I can't imagine the Orcs have got anything too valuable lying around in their holes. There are the Black Walls as well. Always a disheartening unit to see revealed in the late game when you have very little in the way of arrows to deal with them, because of course that's their main weakness in melee. Very savage attackers, of course. Very much akin to the Uruk-hai Berserkers from Isengard. There goes another Mordor general in and amongst the Rhudaur horde there. Close battle though. Very close. Within 10%, which is an impressive tally for Mordor to get up to, considering the pressure they were under constantly. But in the end, well fought, and based on the fact that they were able to execute their early game plan very well, Rhudaur, I do think that they did deserve the win. And also they had a good composition as well, so good forward planning from whoever the faction leader for Rhudaur is. Because they were able to do very well from that perspective. Axes being flung. Killing off yet more of the Temple Guard. So some Black Walls, a few Swordsmen, a few Pikes, some depleted units. The Reforged Javelin is probably the healthiest set of units left. There's also some Rangers way back there. Routing units all over the place. But a highly competitive game, and it's good to see a river crossing again. Interesting factions to have in a river crossing as well, because like I said, like both sides sort of leaning into their archers a little bit more, which is maybe not what you'd expect. I mean, Mordor maybe slightly more so with their Temple Guard and their Rangers. But for the most part, like, just sort of basic Morannon archers, Orc archers, Dunman hunters, Rhudaur marksmen, they played a big part in this battle. And I think Rhudaur, the way that they were able to use them, was very good. It's a very simple thing to do, but it's still important. And there we go. Victory for Rhudaur. The rebellion is successful and they're now free to press further into Mordor's territory once they raise a few more men, of course. Because that was very costly. And there we go. Aguilar getting over 3,000 kills, Death Eater just shy of that. Obviously very impressive tallies, as you'd expect from more ranged focused armies. Aguilar did have the biggest army on the field, but only just, so obviously very big armies all around. Similar factions in terms of how they go about their numbers. Mordor maybe slightly more so on that, sort of focused on... Well, no, actually, I would say they are very even. Like, Rhudaur do focus very heavily on their numbers. But let's see what did the damage for Mordor. Obviously, the archers, you know, the Temple Guard doing very well, considering, you know, armor-piercing archers tend to have slightly more limited amounts of ammunition. We also have those Morannon archers doing very well across the course of the battle as well. Of course, the Rangers were always going to be very key for Mordor here, and getting nearly 700 kills is a very good return from them. When those blobs came forward, they certainly did the business. 3 units of Orc Javelins, unit of Orc Archers also doing very well. The infantry, of course, lagging slightly behind, but that was to be expected considering the relative compositions. And then Death Eater, 418 kills on his Shadow Bows, similar return on that. Morannon Archers doing well. The Catapult, the Troll Catapult getting 108 kills, of course, but again, that's deceptive because it is in melee more than anything else. They got some grazing hits with their boulders, but it was mainly in melee that they did the business. Olag High getting nearly 300 kills, obviously primarily on stuff like Rhudaur Clansmen, just sort of basic spears, but still, nonetheless. Impressive from Mordor that they were able to sort of claw their way back into that fight, because it was looking pretty grim for them early after the well-planned Rhudaur initial assaults, but they did well, I think, Mordor. They deserve a lot of credit, but ultimately, I do think Rhudaur were good value for the win. As for the next battle I'm going to do, I'm not quite sure. I do have another RP battle, actually, I think. A sort of a more mountainous battle between Lothalori and Rune, which I may show off. A lot of these RP battles coming in thick and fast, and I do want to show them while they're still a little bit more relevant, so that one may be next, I'm not sure. We shall see. Regardless, big thank you to Death Eater for sending this one in for me. Big thank you to all the players for being a part of it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.